Thank you very much for coming to the first panel session after a very nice lunch. And I'd just like to begin, first of all, just by introducing you, if you're not familiar with the concept of WISembly. Actually, I should introduce myself first. I'm Fiona Harvey. I'm environment correspondent for The Guardian. I used to be environment correspondent at the Financial Times, and I've been working in environmental journalism for about 15 years. So a lot of the issues that will be coming up are issues that I've written about many times. So I've got a lot of questions to ask our panelists as a result, but I'm not going to be selfish. So I will let you answer questions or ask questions also and get our panelists to answer them. We've got a very distinguished lineup for you, who I'll introduce in a moment. But first of all, I'm not sure, is it WISembly, WISembly? Anyway, it's the web forum that we're going to use to enable you to put up comments and ask questions. So what will happen is that you're able to post comments and ask questions, and I'll be able to see them here on my tablet, and I'll be able to ask the panelists on your behalf. So it's very modern, but it's a very good way of doing conferences. So first of all, if you want to use this, you've got to connect to the OECD hotspot with your smartphone or tablet or whatever you've got. When you're connected, you must go to the website, which is app.wisembly.com. Then you use the keyword OECD Blue. That will enable you to access the interactive platform. At that point, you can post messages, answer the polls. You can participate by Twitter, asking questions using the hashtag #OECDBlue, because it's the blue amphitheater that we're in. And your message will also be displayed, and we'll be able to see it. Finally, if you don't have a smartphone with you, ask your question by SMS. I think there should be a flyer on everybody's chair to tell you what to do. So we're very keen for you to use this, because your participation matters. It really matters to this debate. And we won't be able to answer every question necessarily, but hopefully we'll get a good spectrum of questions, a good flavour of what you in the hall would like to ask. So I hope that's clear. So the thing to remember is to connect and interact. Okay? Great. So we're here today to talk about the urgency of now, and that's looking forward to COP21, which will happen obviously here in Paris later this year. And I really can't stress enough how important this is. I mean, we couldn't be dealing with a bigger problem. This is climate change. This affects the whole future of the globe and all of its inhabitants and future inhabitants. So not a lot at stake, you know, not a great deal to worry about. We know that we need a transition to a low-carbon economy. We've known that for more than a decade, probably longer. But people keep talking about a low-carbon economy, but are they doing it? We've seen emissions have not been on the trajectory that we need. The IPCC has told us that we need to not pass 2 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels if we want to stay in a stable climate. Beyond 2 degrees, the scientists believe that we will encounter climate change that becomes catastrophic and irreversible. So it's very important that we try our best not to reach that limit. At the moment, I'm afraid that we're still on a trajectory that would take us to about 4, 5, perhaps 6 degrees. And that's very damaging. Sometimes when I talk to people, they think that a rise of 4, 5, 6 degrees doesn't sound like very much, but you have to consider that the last ice age was only about 5 degrees colder than we are today. So it makes a great deal of difference in the climate system, in the global climate system. And basically what we're doing when we're pouring out greenhouse gases into the air is we're performing a massive global experiment on the only planet that we have, which doesn't really strike one as the most sensible thing to do. So we're going to talk about the urgency of now. We're going to talk about resource efficiency. We're going to talk about cities. We're going to talk about how to move to a low-carbon economy, what we need to do to get there. So I'm going to begin to introduce our panelists now. And we are very, very privileged to have, first of all, we're going to have, setting the scene, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who's the chair of the Council of the Global Green Growth Institute, and will obviously be well known to you as the former president of Indonesia. And he's also on Twitter, if you would like to use his Twitter handle. So, please, thank you.
Distinguished speakers, panelists, discussions, participants, and moderator, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to join you here in Paris for the OECD Forum 2015 to discuss how we can collectively move beyond COP21 and the challenges facing governments in adjusting policies and institutions toward green growth. This is a subject dear to my heart. In my previous position as President of Indonesia, within 10 years, I progressively evolved my development strategy from pro-growth, pro-poor, pro-job, to become also one of pro-environment. By the time I stepped down, the goal of sustainable growth with equity was already firmly placed at the heart of our national development. Along with other leaders, I also labored to advance the COP process and all collaborative efforts to address climate change. The Bali Roadmap declared at COP13 was particularly memorable for me. In my current capacity as Council Chairman and Assembly President of the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI, I am pleased to be able to join effort to support countries move toward a model of strong, inclusive, and sustainable development. GGGI was launched as an international organization in 2012, and since then its global activities have grown considerably. Today, the Institute has 29 programs operating in 19 countries with a focus on 4 areas we consider essential in transforming economies: energy, green city development, land use, and water. GGGI has been particularly active in assisting developing countries, especially least developed countries. We do this in several ways. We help them develop institutional capacity to move toward green growth by way of better planning, regulatory, financial, and institutional framework. We help them increase green investment flows by designing and implementing bankable green investment projects. And we also help developing countries acquire greater knowledge and benefit from the lesson learned by others through North-South dialogue, as well as through engagement with international stakeholders and private sector partners. All in all, we believe that the more developing countries move toward green growth, the better the prospect of economic progress and environmental sustainability. We are all holding our breath in anticipation of what will happen here in Paris at COP21 at the end of this year. The global climate negotiations have certainly come a long way, but a successful outcome of COP21 is not preordained. Much will depend on the myriad of consultations, compromises, and deals that will take place between now until December. We have gone too far, worked too hard, and risked too much to fail in Paris. Today, there should be no more debate about whether climate change is real or imagined. It is already scientifically established that climate change is happening. That is, that it has been caused by human activities over the last 2 centuries or so, and that we have a small window of opportunity to prevent the situation from getting worse. That window is called COP21. The decisions by COP21 in Paris must enable the human race to reach our ultimate goal to cut global warming and limit the rise of global average temperature below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Anything short of that, as we all know from scientific findings, will lead to human catastrophe. And that can only be done if we have a legally binding, ambitious global climate treaty that would ensure a green future of our low carbon society and economy. Sustainable development and green growth models will have to be mainstream worldwide. We therefore have no other options but to work together to ensure the success of COP21 without underestimating the challenges and difficulties that lie ahead. There are several keys to success that I believe are important. First, is international cooperation and partnership. It seems that this has become ever more urgent in the face of continuing difficulties in the world economy, with a number of nations facing domestic pressures, turning them to be more inward-looking. In some cases, rendering climate issue to be secondary. We therefore need to galvanize a now or never global campaign to raise public interest both in developed and developing countries about the supreme importance of COP21 in Paris. We must make the argument forcefully that what happens in Paris in December will have direct long-term impact on everyone's future livelihood. Second, all stakeholders must be on board. This means governments, scientists, NGOs, environmentalists, businesses, and then general publics. All must be included. All must engage and contribute their part. Indeed, no growth model of any kind can be viable unless everybody is on board. Support from all the stakeholders is the only way the global climate agreement becomes politically sustainable and economically viable. Third, assistance from developed countries to developing countries is still essential. It is true that the developing world is rising in terms of its economic capacity, confidence, and innovation. However, overall, developing countries will not able to meet their climate obligation all on their own. In Indonesia, for example, we have assessed that we could reduce greenhouse gas emission by 26% with our own means and 41% with international support. Thus, developing countries in general will need a helping hand from developed countries. This will also reinforce the sense of global solidarity and fairness that will boost support for the global climate treaty. And fourth, sufficient financing and technology sharing. This, as we all know, has long been key issues in the climate negotiations. My understanding is that after all these years, despite encouraging progress, there is still not enough of financing and technology sharing to ensure an effective global climate treaty. We need to close this gap, and we need to master the necessary political will for this, because such political will presently is not self-evident. If we can ensure these things, then I think success for COP21 is within sight. If and we manage to cross that bridge, the one thing more important than the result we achieve at COP21 is that government will walk the talk by ensuring that their virtuous words are translated into concrete action. The sums of these actions must simultaneously advance economic growth, environmental sustainability, poverty reduction, and social inclusion. We know that developed and developing countries alike are genuinely committed to the goal of achieving low carbon growth, and sustainable development that benefits all. But the challenge is moving toward implementation. Here, we understand that all countries face unique policy choices about how best to pursue sustainable and inclusive growth in accordance with their specific individual circumstances. We recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all that would be applicable across all economic, environmental, and social dimensions. Yet there is strong case that every country, developed and developing, can develop a green growth model that in the long run is more durable and more profitable for business, and much more so that the current models of growth that drive the depletions and destructions of natural resources and lead to increased inequality can be diminished. I know because there is a good example in Indonesia about this. In East Kalimantan, GGGI has done work that practically demonstrates that infrastructure investment can be made greener without compromising economic and social benefit. This work found that substituting coal with biomass and other renewable energy sources can have a net benefit of 3.8 billion US dollars, which is equivalent to 10% of the province's GDP. This is only a tip of the iceberg. There is a growing body of evidence from around the world and from organizations such as the OECD and GGGI that green policies need not be detrimental to employment and that a global shift toward a clean energy economy can create millions of green jobs for workers around the world. Such transition to green growth will not occur easily. Inevitably, there will be bureaucratic and political resistance, which is why a whole new mindset will need to be enabled. The country's leadership has to take the lead. Investment have to be made in green industries, and government ministries must work together as opposed to working in different silos. Ministries have traditionally focused on either economic, environmental, or social issues and develop their expertise accordingly. As such, ministries cannot necessarily account for the impact of policy outcomes in areas outside of their respective portfolios. In short, government in developed and developing countries need to improve the effectiveness of their policy process and institution in order to translate the vision of green growth into reality. We must emphasize multi-directional knowledge sharing and learning between developing and developed countries. GGGI, together with our partners in developed and developing countries, the private sector and civil society, is supporting this effort. This includes through multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, a joint effort between GGGI, OECD, UNEP, and the World Bank, as well as the new climate economy. I look forward to sharing the knowledge that GGGI has accumulated and is applying in developing countries, as well as learning from the knowledge of other speakers to test my institute's own thinking and apply in the countries where we work. In closing, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our moderator, speakers, discussion, and participants for joining us today and engaging what is sure to be an insightful and extremely valuable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that very succinct summary of where we are and where we need to be. That's a great way of setting the scene for our debate. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question by Wizembly now. I'm going to ask whether you think the prospects for a global climate deal are better now than in 2009. So if you can press yes or no, that would be great. We can do this as a poll. 2009, of course, was the date of the Copenhagen summit, at which world leaders gathered to forge a global agreement on climate change. It was partially successful and partially not. We do now have targets for the first time from all the major developed and the major developing countries that run until 2020. But of course, what we're here to discuss is what will happen after 2020, because that's the crucial question for COP21 in Paris later this year. So you've got your Wizimbly details, so do please join in. I will let you get on with that, and I'm going to start introducing our panelists. First up, we've got Sharon Burrow, who is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, and her Twitter hashtag is @SharonBurrow. So you should be able to do that on Twitter if you'd like to. I'm going to ask, first of all, we've talked about a low carbon economy, but a question that's often missing when we talk about a low carbon economy is how do we ensure that during that transition, which is going to be a difficult transition and require a lot of investment, and as we've just heard, how do we ensure that that transition is fair for everyone, fair for workers, with a better alignment of economic, employment, innovation strategies? How do we ensure that this is a good deal for the workers of the world?
Well, we know that the alternative is not. You know what we say, there are no jobs on a dead planet, and that's much more than a slogan. That's a reality. We are seeing loss of jobs, livelihoods, lives right now in too many parts of the world. But the other thing that I want to say up front is that citizens are way ahead of their governments. A recent poll we did in 50% in countries with 50% of global GDP shows that 90% of people want action, and 79% of people want action in the next 12 months or less. You know, I don't want to be provocative, but if I was, well, I do want to be provocative, but if I was answering that question right now, given the low ambitions from countries, I'd say we were better placed in 2009. The diplomacy didn't get us there, but the ambition for mandated responsibility was higher than it is now. I'm looking at Ivo, he's kind of nodding, but maybe, maybe not. But, you know, that's why I'm proud to be part of the new climate economy, where we are actually saying as a group of very disparate people that we've got to do this ourselves. We need government, we need the global agreement, there's no question about that. We'll condemn governments who don't make the grade, but we need to do it ourselves. And so for us, industrial transformation is the key. Beyond COP, we need industrial transformation that's serious. The industries of today will be the industries of tomorrow: construction, agricultural, services, health, you know, pick an industry. You will find it there in the form that befits the demand in our economies. The key, though, is to transition energy and production processes to make sure that the new economy is getting us towards that zero carbon ambition. So what do we need to do about it? We need people to act. We actually need people to act. We're going to see people against people, workers against workers. We're seeing it already. Richard Trumka and I had a breakfast session about this morning. We're seeing communities against communities. Why? Because nobody's talking to the people. Why is it we don't have governments who are saying we have a plan for just transition? We actually know that we need to respect the workers and the communities in the fossil fuel area who brought us the prosperity of today. Can't just dump them. It's my argument with the disinvestment movement. I think a little bit shakes the tree, and we shouldn't be investing in new coal or new fossil fuel exploration. But if you just pull your money out of existing companies that might be encouraged with engagement to diversify into renewable energy, to give those workers, through their own social dialogue, a chance to say, here's the plan for our company and for your jobs, we're not serious. So we need a plan from governments, and it's about the time-bound nature of coal and fossil fuels in our economy, what the guarantee of pensions is, what investment in the communities is serious about renewal of those communities, and what skills we need to develop the workforce of the future. And we need our employers, if they're serious, to sit with us and with their communities to say, how do we position our industries to be the companies of tomorrow? Because otherwise, if we see simply the flood, and we must because our pension funds are at risk if they remain in the brown economy, but if we see a flood of money because there's no trust in the corporations, and there isn't now, and no trust in government, then frankly our economies will be shattered in ways that we haven't even considered. So there is no doubt that unless people demand that governments and industry work with them, act for a just transition, we're in deep trouble.
Thank you. Those are very important points. Actually, don't put your microphone down, because I'd just like to quickly follow up on that, which is that some jobs are going to be destroyed in the move to a new climate economy. What would you say to people who are working today in fossil fuel industries? What can you offer them?
Well, some technologies are going to be destroyed. I say to people, if you take companies like, let me name a couple, but if you take companies like Statoil, BP, Shell, they mouth the right things, but why is their capex so low in transitioning their technology from offshore oil platforms to offshore wind platforms or to solar or to other areas where in fact we can see both the jobs in the energy sector, because yes, they might be different skills mix, but there'll still be jobs in energy, there'll still be jobs in supply, and we need to make sure that when we look at the 90 trillion, I think it is, Helen, that we say is necessary in investment to between 2030 and 50, that investment is in good jobs. There are jobs in the transition. So our sons and daughters may very well work in energy. They just might not work on a coal-fired power station or digging coal out of the ground. You know, I remember going to school with the other scholarship girl winner when I was way back, in my high school days, and she didn't go on to school. Dreadful shame, beautiful Indigenous woman, because she got a job that was considered fantastic in our local community in the telephone exchange. Find me a telephone exchange today, but telecommunications still exists. So this is a false dichotomy. Yes, we need to give people and their communities certainty, but, are you doing the job you started when you left school? I suspect most of us can see, even if we're in the same industries, how our jobs have shifted.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, working in journalism as I do, I've seen an awful lot of changes, so I know how that transition can happen. It can be painful, but it can happen. Thank you very much for that, Sharon. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Marcin Korolek, who is the Secretary of State for Climate Policy and Minister of Environment at Poland. Again, also on Twitter, should you wish. I'd like to ask you, what is at stake for you, do you think, and for the world indeed, at COP21 in Paris? How do you see this?
Thank you. I'm not sure I can agree with the former president of Indonesia about the foreseen result of the Paris conference. I don't think it is important to think about the outcome of Paris conference, whether it is reach or not 2 degrees goal. Eventually it will not reach. And I think people in 2020 will ask if the Paris conference create a model of international cooperation which will lead us to that direction. I think what we need to have as the outcome of Paris is to have a dynamic new model of international cooperation, new dynamic agreement, which will work in some cycles, 5 or 10 year cycles, and which will first provide a broad participation, because actual system, namely Kyoto system, is divisive, is old-fashioned, addressing common but differentiated responsibilities, having those silos of those who have obligations those who do not have obligations. I think this new agreement should address the question of CBDR and in that way invite countries to be part of this agreement by self-differentiation. So not the continuation of artificial differentiation, but self-differentiation is a key, in my opinion, to guarantee the broad participation. But I think we should not be obsessed by the initial level of ambition. We should focus on the participation, on the mechanics of this agreement to make this goal to be realized in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could just follow up again, just on that, the similar point that I was asking Sharon. Poland is a country that's highly dependent on coal at present. So how are you managing this transition?
I think Poland could be a great example for a number of countries. During our transition, we reached a record of 30% of CO2 reductions, having in the same time 200% of GDP growth. So we decoupled the growth from reductions, which in a scale which is probably not to be reported elsewhere. I think also that we have some experiments in Europe with our own domestic climate policy. And I think we have to, how to say, analyze or reflect how to change this, policy, and not to talk about low carbon or deep decarbonization, but rather to talk about carbon neutrality. Because this model which we are following or we are trying to establish in Europe is for sure probably not real one in terms that maybe we will see a transition from energy sector from fossil fuels to another concept. But this model of decarbonization in Europe will lead to disindustrialization. So I think we have to change a concept of having deep decarbonization towards having a carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality will mean to capture the C or the CO2 and to use or store it somewhere. And I think if we will create such a model, I hope we will be able to export that model to a number of developing countries, because our experiments are not extremely cheap, and for sure they are not replicable in developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that viewpoint. That's very useful. I think, or do we have the results of the Assembly poll? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I can't see them on here. Yeah. Well. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. Ah, right. Okay. So that's a resounding yes from the audience here today on the prospects for Paris. That's good. We're going to ask another question shortly, which is going to be a harder one. But I think that's a very positive finding. So people are generally feeling positive about this. Excellent. So there is a point in carrying on. That's good. Thank you for that. Thank you for everyone who participated. I'm going to move on to introduce our next panelist, who is Helen Mountford, who's the Director of Economics at the World Resources Institute and is also the Global Program Director at the New Climate Economy Project. Helen, perhaps you could introduce yourself in a second by telling us a little bit about the New Climate Economy Project, just for people who aren't familiar with it. And then perhaps could you tell us about looking at the transition to a low-carbon economy. We want to make sure that this is not seen as an economic restraint because that would be difficult for people to bear, especially countries that are still coming out of recession. So can you tell us how that works, how we make sure that the new climate economy is a good economy for everyone?
Certainly, Fiona, I'd be very happy to. In fact, the New Climate Economy is a project that was launched a couple of years ago, and it was launched with a very open question by a number of countries. Is climate action a constraint to growth? Is it? Is it not? In what circumstances? In what countries? In what sectors? What is the relationship between economic growth and taking action on climate change? What they did was they pulled together 29 fantastic global commissioners, including Sharon Burrow here, but also Angel Gurria, who's head of the OECD. We had people representing former presidents, former finance ministers, economy ministers, international economic organizations, business. It was really sort of economic and finance leaders, trade union from around the world. And they came together and said, okay, collect the evidence for us. We want to see what is actually happening out there. One of the things that surprised, I think, most members of the panel, and Sharon can confirm this perhaps later or deny, one of the things that surprised them is once we started looking at the latest evidence from around the world, different countries, from advanced economies to emerging to developing countries, there was strong evidence that more and more now we can actually achieve both economic growth, prosperity, as President Yudhoyono said, and also climate action together. It does not have to be a choice. It's a false dichotomy. The question is how you do it and what you do to achieve that. So one of the things that we've looked at is why is that the case? And again, this is drawing on evidence from over 120 organizations, OECD certainly, the Global Green Growth Institute, many more. And what we found is that there's been a number of shifts in recent years which has made this even more possible. One is just pure technological developments. What we've seen with the falling costs of renewables, with the ability to have more and more capacity through wind and solar, we've seen the costs of solar components have halved since 2010 alone. That is one huge development. There's more technological possibilities, lower costs, which open up opportunities. The other is that there's more and more awareness of the costs of our current models. And this is not something we've seen before, but our current economic models, the dependency on fossil fuels, we pulled together some evidence which looked at the costs of air pollution. Fossil fuel-related air pollution today kills about 3.7 million people worldwide each year. That is something which is not often taken into consideration when choosing what sort of energy power to develop. In Poland alone, we know that coal, from some of the OECD work, coal-related and fossil fuel-related air pollution kills about 25,000 people. And we can take almost any country in the world, whether advanced, emerging, or developing, and look at what these impacts are. But again, they're often not considered in the policy choices. Once you start to bring these out, once you start to consider how the low-carbon economy is actually becoming cheaper and easier and more possible to achieve, and the full costs of the high-carbon economy, the balance shifts significantly. We're also seeing quite a bit of policy advance, and this was interesting. 5-10 years ago, you talk to people about carbon pricing, most people would say, that's that thing the European Union is doing, and we're a little bit suspicious of it. The rest of us will ignore it. We now have over 40 countries worldwide that have some form of carbon pricing in place, and we've got over 20 subnational districts, states, provinces doing so. And when you look at the map of this, there's an excellent map from the World Bank. It's spreading. It's all over the world, and it is developing more and more each year. Just last year, we had 1,000 companies that came forward, major multinational companies, saying they want more carbon pricing. That was a surprise, but they came forward saying so. So the policy arena is also shifting. Now, the challenge is, how do we actually achieve that? And that's one of the things we're focusing on. We focused on that some last year, even more so this year. The Global Commission is looking at what are the actions that can be taken through partnerships across countries, with the private sector, with cities, to actually make this happen in practice. As Sharon mentioned, we have massive investments that will be taking place over the next 15 years, an estimated $90 trillion in investments in energy, in cities, in land use. And we have a choice now. If we take the right decisions and go towards low carbon, we will save in terms of fuel expenditure, in terms of upstream investment in fossil fuel exploration. We'll save through more compact and connected cities, better public transport. We're going to have reduced costs of congestion. In the US alone, we had a study this year that came out saying that congestion costs the US $1 trillion per year. Traffic congestion. So you will be having many savings. There would be costs and investments that are needed up front, certainly, and I think looking at the tools to do that is essential, and many are doing so. But overall, it does not have to be more expensive. That $90 trillion, it's about the same whether you go high carbon and inefficient and polluting, or if you go low carbon and connected and better for people. So we have a choice now in which direction we're going to make our investments, and the sooner we make that choice and start to shift, start to do the transition that Sharon mentioned, the better we're going to be. The cheaper, the more possible this is going to be.
Thank you very much for that. And as you know, we've just seen that 80% of the people in the hall think that we've got good prospects for a global climate deal. So you're speaking to a very receptive audience. But on the new climate economy, what I'd like to know is that we've talked about transition to a low economy for years and years. You know, I can't remember how many articles I've written about it. But why are we still building new coal-fired power plants? Why are we still extracting oil from tar sands? Why are we exploring new areas of the world, like the Arctic, for oil, if we believe in this?
I think at the same time as many are recognizing the importance of going low carbon and what is needed, unfortunately there's many who are actually still pushing for some vested interests in society. And what we find is that policies and governments, as a result, are often misaligned. It can be incoherent. So on the one hand, while we have 40 countries and 20 provinces and states with carbon pricing in place, we have many, many countries that are at the same time subsidizing carbon emissions. So we're pricing carbon on the one hand, but we're also subsidizing fossil fuels and continuing to do so. There's been progress, but overall, subsidies to fossil fuels are probably something in the region of about $600 billion per year, so quite significant. Again, there's been some very, very serious progress in the last couple of years, particularly with the low oil prices. Governments have started to take advantage of this, but it's a lot. And even here, we're here at the OECD today. Last year, when the ministers of finance and economy met, they agreed to look at one area where there is continuing subsidies to coal and to fossil fuels, and that's the export credits arrangements. They agreed to look at this, and I'm hoping that they will report back this year on what they've actually found in terms of how to shift government support through export credits away from a new coal-powered generation.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. That's very clear. Excellent. I'm going to move on next to talk a little bit about business, because we've got with us, we're very privileged to have with us, Hélène Lebedev, who's the Deputy Vice President for Sustainable Development at Veolia Environnement here in France. The hashtag is, the Twitter handle is @Veolia, should you wish to know. And I'd like to know, you're coming from a business point of view, so what is the role of business and indeed of civil society in this transition to a low economy? What can you bring to the table?
Sure. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Seeing the result of the poll, I can only agree with this result, seeing what my company has done between 2009 and today. When we look back at 2009, businesses and Veolia, for example, were really looking at reducing their impact, measuring their greenhouse gas emissions and reducing them. Today, we have really moved toward building new solutions, this is really what's happening now, and there was a Business Climate Summit on the 21st of May, and it really showed the move that's been done. And it's obvious, it's compulsory. Climate is so global as a stake that no one company, no one city, no one organization, no one nation alone can deploy or invent the solutions to this stake. It's only can be done together by joining and intensifying efforts towards cooperation, innovation, and solidarity. So we as Veolia, we are particularly committed to play a key role and contribute to the solutions against climate change. And we act in 3 directions. And we act in these directions with all our stakeholders and in real logic of co-constructions. These directions, I mentioned the first, which was already there in 2009, which is we measure, we try to reduce our impact. We've been doing that for years. And we contribute also to the development of methodology of calculations. This is really important, measurement and reduction, but this is not enough. This year we have taken, and this is also new compared to 2009, a very proactive position for a price of carbon. It's been mentioned. We have signed the call for the World Bank. And I'm really amazed to see companies asking for a price for something external. This is very new, and this is very positive, I think, because everybody is aware that now that without a price on carbon, the technologies won't shift by themselves, and this won't be done alone. We are also in favor of mechanisms not only for CO2, but also for other gases. And one of them is methane, because we know that this gas contributes to a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. It weighs 14%, calculated over 100 years, but if you calculate it over 20 years, it weighs 40%, which is a lot, and solutions exist to capture that gas. They are not so expensive, but mechanisms are not in place so that they become viable for business. And third direction, which is really now exploding, I would say, in the businesses, is the construction and the innovation for new technologies, for new low-carbon solutions, as we call them. And we as Veolia are really convinced that this resides in the change in the model to tackle resources. It's been mentioned, we cannot live sustainably with linear models, which consist in extracting resources, using them, and throwing them away. This won't be viable with a planet of 9 billion people. We have to invent the new models of using, reusing, replenishing, recycling those resources so that they are not used only once, but several times. And the solutions exist, the technologies exist. Today, what we have to build are the economic models and the societal models, as we call them. I will give one example to finish of that circular economy and of what all that can be done now. This example is the one of a wastewater treatment plant. We are working in wastewater treatment as Veolia, and a few years ago, a wastewater treatment plant was only a plant that took water, treated it using a lot of energy, and throwing the clean water in the rivers or in the tables. And it produced waste, which was sludges that we needed to treat, incinerate, or whatever. It was really linear, and it was consuming a lot of energies. Today, a wastewater plant can be positive in terms of energy, because we take the energy for wastewater, we take the energy from the sludge. We don't only throw them away now, we produce biogas from them, we produce fertilizers for the farmers, we produce plastic even from sludge. We can recycle water and use it again instead of throwing it in the rivers or in the tappers. We can use it for agriculture or for industrial matters. Even we can drink it in some places where there are real constraints. And we can produce heat from wastewater, meaning that we have completely changed the way we deal with that wastewaters to have facilities that are positive in energy, that even sell energy, sell fertilizers, sell plastics, sell a lot of things. And this is also not only technological change, this is really a societal change, because we have to deal very differently with all the stakeholders we have. We have to build partnerships with a new kind of customers. And this is where the innovations need to reside now, because it's not always easy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And it's great to have a perspective from business there, because obviously, you know, you're on the cutting edge of actually creating the new economy that we're talking about. And we had only a matter of days ago here in Paris, we had a business and climate conference where François Hollande came along and addressed us. He told us, in fact, that he was hoping for a miracle in Paris. It seems that people here are a bit more optimistic, maybe, than he is even. But what worries me, when we get businesses coming here, and I'm sure there are many businesses represented here in the hall, what worries me is not the businesses who come to forums like this, it's the businesses who don't come. So how do we engage them? Do we have to force them to take an interest by regulation? Is that the way to do it?
Sure, regulation is one way, but the momentum is so big now in the business community that there is, as usual, there are businesses that are very engaged, that are the locomotive of a train, but other businesses will have to follow. They won't have choice. They won't survive if they don't. And of course, the locomotive asks for more regulation, because it's the only way, or regulation or price of carbon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And before we move on to our next speaker, we're getting a few comments and questions in here through Twitter and so on. And one of them is from Bruce Didier. I don't know if he's here or outside, but he's asking whether optimism, the optimism we've all shown, 80% of you thinking that we can get a deal in Paris, is optimism enough to reach agreement at COP21? Our panelists can address that when I open up the discussion shortly, but I'd like to address that first. I can say that optimism is not enough on its own to reach agreement, but we are sure as heck not going to get an agreement if we don't have optimism. So it's really good to see the optimism of people here. So thank you very much for that question. I'm going to move on to our final panelist, who is Sugil Yang, who is visiting professor of green growth at KDI in Korea. So thank you for joining us. And I'd like to ask you, the policies that we need from governments, the outlook that we need from businesses and from people, all need to be long-term, that we need to look at this in the long term. And the problem is that comes into conflict with politics, because politics typically works on a short-term cycle, you know, an electoral cycle of about, say, 4 or 5 years in most countries. What can we do about that? How can we address that conflict between political short-termism and the need for a long-term view, long-term policies, long-term action?
Thank you. I am a research professor of green growth and sustainable development at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management in Seoul, Korea, and I have served as a chairman of Korea's former government's Presidential Committee on Green Growth. So I was wondering how you would classify me, and I don't have an answer myself about that. Now, let me first, may I, if you don't mind, I'd like to say that probably the most critical question that should have been asked has not been yet raised. According to the Y Assembly, more than 80% of the respondents said that the COP21 is going to be better than the Copenhagen COP. Now, it is a bit better, I agree with you, but we should ask, is it going to be better enough? Is it going to be good enough to deliver on the goal of 2 degrees centigrade? We heard a lot about the benefits of new climate and economy and green growth and so on. They're all very good things. But will they contribute to delivering on the 2 degrees centigrade? My concern is that we do have that goal, and that is the goal being pursued is going to be pursued at the COP21. But this COP21 relies basically on the idea of INDCs, which represent a bottom-up approach, incremental approach, and short-term approach. It focuses on the outcome to be achieved by 2025 or 2030. But what we do need is to limit the warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade, and that would require us, all the countries, to live within the carbon budget of something like 825 gigaton by 2050, which in turn, according to IEA and IPCC and so on, would require us to bring down to focus on CO2, the carbon emissions per capita to 1.6. Now, unless we are sure that the COP21 or the process to emerge from that negotiation is going to deliver on meeting this target, then we are off to probably much likely to go for a runaway climate change, and which is what we want to prevent from happening. So, and furthermore, for that purpose, we do need deep decarbonization. At the same time, deep decarbonization, however we pursue it, should not jeopardize the socio-economic development aspirations of the individual countries. Now, we have to make sure that we can deliver on both. But if we fail on the second one, then our effort for the decarbonization won't be successful either. So, I am a member of an international collaborative research team, which has been organized by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the IDRI, the French Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, which involves 16 countries, all the 16 largest CO2 emitters, and we are engaged in an exercise which we call backcasting the necessary technological, economic, energy system transformation, which will deliver on the goal of 2 degrees centigrade. And this requires us to start with a goal and then walk backward to the current stage as to what kind of actions we will have to undertake, what kind of pathways can help us deliver on this 2 degrees centigrade. And we have completed the first phase of the project. Now, the 16 national decarbonization pathways that we have explored do not quite exactly deliver the 2 degrees centigrade, but they are quite close to doing so, so that this year, as we intensify and strengthen the research methodology and embolden our ambition, we are sure that we can come up with deep decarbonization pathways for individual countries which can deliver this 2 degrees centigrade. Now, what is the purpose of would be the purpose of developing this national decarbonization pathways? Now, there is a clause, I think, in the draft negotiating text for COP21 that there should be created a mechanism to review progress and further to increase ambitions. Now, these NDDPs, as I now begin to call it, will serve as the instrument for reviewing the progress, as well as instrument with which we can embolden and increase our ambitions for a deep decarbonization. And so we have to, in order to make sure that we'll deliver on that 2 degrees centigrade target, we'll have to start backward from that goal and then work out the technological solutions. And then in the second stage, we look at the financial requirements and what are the enabling conditions, such as domestic policy regulations, as well as international technological cooperations, and so on. So unless we do introduce this concept of backcasting, I don't think we can be sure that however successful you might think that COP21 in Paris is going to be, will actually help us avert that climatic disaster. So let me sort of propose to you to embrace this concept of backcasting, as well as the consequent national decarbonization pathway exercise. And our team proposes to incorporate this into the text for COP21, so that individual countries will be asked to undertake, develop this NDDPs, which are only aspirational, illustrative scenarios, and continue to work on that over time, while that would help the governments to level up their ambitions and be more operational problem solving in terms of approaching the climate change target. Now, you asked me a specific question, which I think I should have answered, which is that the problem, this is a problem, common problem with policy making in every country, especially in democratic countries, but governments typically operate within the time horizon of a few years. I don't know how President Yudhoyono did when he was president, but in our case, we are still talking about 3 years economic reform program. With the past, that would be within the tenure of the current president. Now even that 3 years time horizon is shortening as time passes. And so we have this short-termism, which is a very common popular characteristic of nearly every country. However, this climate change is a very long-term structural challenge. And therefore, the problem of climate change mostly escapes the attention of the policymakers and ministers who are preoccupied with short-term problems, and there are, I'm afraid, too many of such short-term problems that they have to be concerned about. So we have to overcome this short-termism, and then there is also this problem of silo structure of decentralized government, so that industrial ministry is interested in protecting the industrial competitiveness of domestic industries, unlike the environmental ministry, which would be interested in this climate change actions, so that we would have sort of an interministerial conflict on how strong a climate change policy that our government should pursue. And then for the last several years, it has been a one short-term economic crisis after another, so that the Korean government on the whole did not successfully escape being captured by the short-term concerns about the state of the economy and so on. So that although Korean government made itself famous by proclaiming green growth strategy, which is an older name for Helen's new climate economy, we did not quite successfully launch Korea's green growth strategy. Let me illustrate this. In 2008, you might recall we had this oil shock with the oil price rising to $150 and followed by a global recession. And that's when exactly Korean government launched and announced this green growth strategy. And then we pursued and proposed this to the OECD ministerial. We proposed the Green New Deal as a way of coping with that crisis at the time. So we did that. And as a result, Korea was one of the countries who recorded the fast recovery from the economic crisis at the time, and for which we were praised by the OECD. But we did a little bit of cheating at the time. When the oil price shot up, we held the electricity prices constant, so that the Korea's monopoly public utility, so-called KEPCO, began to experience a huge mounting debt. In other words, the government, the KEPCO began to subsidize consumption of electricity by industries and by households and so on, so that we ended up experiencing, for the first time in 40 years, a series of a blackout, not national, but rotated blackout from region to region. And so we were gripped with the power failure crisis for the subsequent 3 years or so, despite our claim of the leadership for a green growth strategy. Now that is a very stark illustration of the conflict between short-term interest and the long-term interest. So, anyway, the solution would be what we propose to do, which is to promulgate green growth as a long-term strategy, so that, as a follow-up, we prepared and publicized Korea's green growth strategy, which covers the period up to 2050. That was meant to be a way of overcoming the short-termism. And then we created the Presidential Committee on Green Growth, which would be the whole of government approach to implementation of green growth strategy, with which we wanted to overcome the silo problems. So that illustrates, should provide an answer to your question, except that while the global environment has not been so supportive, there was a limit to which Korean government could stick to green growth strategy with effectiveness. So that now my conclusion is that we also have to complement this strategy with whole of the world approach. All the countries should be involved in launching a global solution for this global collective action problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. That's great to have that question addressed. It's a question that has come up also through the our little Twitter feed and so on. So it's great that we've had that comprehensively addressed there. I'm going to ask another question of the people in the hall and indeed outside it through our fantastic Wisembly app, and it is: do you think that the net impact of low oil prices will be good or bad for climate policy? 1, if you think it's good. 2, if you think it's bad. So please get answering that one. Obviously, the impact of low oil prices is going to be a key determinant for us in future. A lot of people weren't expecting us to have oil prices where they are now. So that's a really big issue. I've got... while you're answering that, I've got some questions coming through from Twitter. I'm going to just ask a few of them to our panel now, and then I'm going to invite some questions for the hall. I'm going to take a few questions at once so that we're able to get a few more answered, if that's okay. So, panelists, get ready for this. One, we want to know, how do we create the political will to address climate change? That's a key question. We've got a question about how can we make progress on the climate agenda if some people in the US doubt the science behind it. We've got a question, this is a very pointed one: should the US and Europe adopt a 1 car per family policy? What do you think of that? That's an interesting one. I'm not sure how popular that will be. And also, let's get our panelists also to address this question of whether the net impact of low oil prices will be good or bad for the economy. Who'd like to start? Helen, I'd like to pick on you to begin with. Let's take these questions of how do we create the political will. Tell me whether you think yes or no to a one car per family policy, and then what do we do about climate change doubters?
Thanks very much, Fiona, and thanks for picking on me. I think the question about how we create political will actually goes back to the first question that you picked up from the Wizembly, is optimism enough to reach agreement? I think these are actually linked, and I think that's part of the discussion here. We're starting to see quite a bit of movement, both within governments. The INDCs we have on the table, some of these represent historically ambitious targets, really quite strong moves towards a new economy. On the other hand, we know that they do not add up to enough. That's already starting to become clear. They're not going to be quite what we need. So we're starting to see movement in businesses, we're seeing movements from the trade union, etc. It's not quite enough. The question is how you present this and how you highlight the opportunities. So to me, the optimism, it's not just about empty optimism. It's actually about providing the evidence base, the information, the data, the analysis, the country case studies, which can show how this can happen in reality on the ground. How can you actually move forward to more prosperous economies, to ones that are better for people, as well as better for the climate. And I think we've got quite a bit of evidence. It's not always coming to the fore. In contrast, what we have is quite a lot of evidence and quite a lot of lobbying power suggesting that this just simply is not possible. And we need to move away from that. So I think the political will, it's not going to come just from the governments and the leaders. It's going to come from the people who talk to them, who march on the streets of New York or other countries. It's going to come from businesses taking really strong leadership roles and moving forward, and quite a few of them are. So highlighting those and the opportunities and the good practice is one of them. The one car per family, I very much hope not. I'm hoping that quite a few families don't have a car. And in the future, we'll actually have lots of opportunities where families don't need to have a car. There's better opportunities. I lived here in Paris for 16 years. We never had a car. My children desperately wanted one. I think just for the idea of having a car, it would have been a hassle and it would have been completely useless. We did not need one. And if we have cities that are compact, that are well connected with excellent public transport, that have what you need around you, you don't need a car. So I'm hoping we can move towards something which is much less than one car per family. And then finally, oil prices. Can I say something about oil prices, or was there something else you wanted me to?
Oil prices are lower than anybody expected, I think, because of the shale oil boom in the US and, because of what OPEC is doing. So low oil prices are pretty bad for the climate, aren't they?
Well, so in fact, I think the way the question was posed initially was, are low oil prices good or bad for climate policy? So I think there's two different things. One, the climate and climate policy. And I'm hoping they can start to converge. On climate policy, there's definitely opportunities, and we've seen 28 countries around the world in the last couple of years have started to put in place fossil fuel subsidy reforms. The IMF has declared that at least 12 of these are going to be durable, they're successful, they will stay in place. And partly there is an opportunity because there are lower oil prices to put these policies in place, to actually move forward with removing the subsidies that have been there before. Whether they're good or not for the climate, I would hope that if people take sensible approaches, they will realize that, that these will not hamper new investments in renewables or low carbon systems. The risk is the short-termism that was mentioned before. What we know about the oil prices is that we don't know where they'll be tomorrow or the next week or 2 months from now or a year from now. They are very, very volatile. So there's a real risk that with low oil prices, people are going ahead and making huge investments. In the US, you see this. People are investing in very fuel-inefficient, very fuel-guzzling vehicles because of low oil prices. But in a year, the oil prices may be back up and they're left with their car. So if we're making investments in infrastructure based on low oil prices today, it's a bit silly. We've got a lot of volatility. We don't know where they're going to be. We should stay the course with investments in renewables. We know that the price of wind, the price of solar in the future is going to continue to be zero.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Minister, I think you wanted to come in on this question as well.
I will start with the question concerning the one car per family concept. And in my deep conviction, climate policy cannot be austerity measure. It should be a development tool. I think we will have more cars per family, maybe electric one. But it should not be treated or perceived as austerity measure. And about the political will, we are obviously closer today than in the same time, 2009, ahead of Copenhagen. But I think the part of the answer is the testament of the Warsaw Conference and the concept of intended or not necessarily intended, but nationally determined contributions, this bottom-up approach, and the fact that there will be no country cornered or forced to take obligations in Paris. And I think that that luxury of negotiators or prime ministers there, that they will decide on their own, is the readiness to take effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Sugu, very briefly, because I'd like to take some questions from the hall, but yes? And you, Sharon, afterwards. Yep, please. Yep.
Right. About one car policy, I don't think it will be necessary. I'm relying on the results from the DDPP project that I just mentioned. Our approach to decarbonization to 2050 relies on a mixture of three approaches. One is to improve the energy efficiency, and secondly, to decarbonize electricity with renewables and so on. And then finally, fuel switching, including switching to electricity, so that and then if we have to use the carbon, then we should deploy the CCS. Now, under that approach, ideally we can end up in a world where carbon no longer is emitted. And actually, by 2075 or so, according to the IPCC, we have to actually go for zero emission of carbon, greenhouse gases, and so on. So that in this world, whether you have two cars or more, it would not really matter that much, except that through the market mechanism, if the energy has become more expensive, for example, you might be induced to save on your trip and on the number of cars that you might own. So this can be induced through the market mechanism. And about the oil price, let me draw on Korea's experiences with cheap electricity prices. Cheap electricity prevented or discouraged investment in green innovations, in the development of green technologies. It discouraged investment for energy efficiency and so on. So as a matter of general principle, a cheap or low price of energy is not good for what we want to do. So right now we have this very cheap oil, and then I think this creates an opportunity for us to introduce the carbon tax at the global level. I'm not sure if we have the political will to do so or not. I have some other comments, but I don't think you want me to go into that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that very perceptive comment. We're going to get the results of our poll in a moment, but Sharon, would you mind if we get the results of the poll, and then I might take a couple more questions, and then you can take your pick to answer. I'll come to you first. Do you think the net impact of low oil prices will be good or bad for climate policy? There we go. Only about nearly 20%, 1 in 5, think that it will be good, and by far the majority, pretty much the same number as were hopeful of a deal in Paris. You think that 82% of you think that the net impact of low oil prices will be bad for climate policy. So there we go. It's a dangerous world we live in. We've taken questions from the internet, questions for the panelists. I'm going to just take any questions from the hall now that you haven't already submitted through here. We've got a microphone here, there's a lady here, and I'm going to ask our panel, and there's a gentleman here, so I'll take you first, madam. Any others? Because I'm going to ask our panelists to be very brief in their answers to these, because we want to get through it.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers, the panelists, and President Yudhoyono for the very comprehensive speakers. And I would like to ask the question here that to the Minister of Poland. You know that what is really, when we talk about the political will, I really want to hear from you. What is the national policy in your country for the long-term and short-term climate change, and also the zero economic growth? And then I thank the President Yudhoyono because he gives a very good experience. I'm from Indonesia, that we have experience with the tsunami and earthquake, which at that time the President Yudhoyono, the President of Indonesia, then the pro-growth, pro-poor, and pro-job and pro-environment actually is very important, because when you have one catastrophe, then you have no growth, you have no job, and much more the poor people will be there. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I will put it to the Minister in 1 second. Just you can have a chance to think about that while we take the other question over here.
I was glad to hear that carbon prices were mentioned by the two ladies, and already 40 countries have a carbon price system. Only carbon prices are extremely low, only $10, I think. Wouldn't it be better to set a carbon price for the future, about $70? I don't think it's much more difficult than setting 2 degrees Celsius as an objective, to set carbon prices as an objective, and investors can then decide what they do. But I have the suspicion that there is the policy is not willing to agree on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Panelists, you can be thinking about this. We've got a final question in the front here from Eva de Boer.
Thank you. I've got a question for Sharon. I don't know if I got the numbers right, but I think you said that 74% of people in countries that hold 50% of global GDP are calling for serious action on climate change. I don't think their politicians are hearing them. So should we be having referenda on climate action?
A referendum.
Referenda.
Oh.
Referenda.
That's a nice thought. Okay, well, I'm going to give our panelists a chance to answer. Minister, there was a very direct question to you, so I'll take you first, and then I'll go down the panelists, okay?
First of all, thank you for this question. I will start with one point I already said, that I think we can show something already, this minus 30% achieved. But additionally to that, Poland is today a member of European Union. And the European Union is, in environmental field, much more integrated than the US, for example. So practically 99% of, or nearly to 100% of our environmental legislation is coming from the union legislation. And in that, first, in the perspective of 2020, we will have additionally 20% of reductions. We will have, as a union, 20% of renewables in 2020. And additionally, till 2030, minus 40% of CO2 reductions and 27% of 27% of renewables. and we will contribute to those figures, being a member of United Union. And I will try to answer one sentence for the carbon price question, because what I feel in Europe, we have some experiments with a trading scheme, which is not anymore a trading scheme, because it is a mix of trading scheme with massive administrative intervention, which is making the situation for investors absolutely unpredictable. Because we noticed a few days ago a decision concerning so-called market stability reserve, so another intervention reducing number of allowances in the market. But who can prove to the investor, which is asked to invest billions of dollars or euros for new electricity plants, that, for instance, in 2025, there would be not another intervention, this time increasing number of allowances in the market, because there will be emotions in the room of the parliament or the council. So I think in the spirit of predictability and for investors, the concept of trading scheme replaced by carbon tax would be much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that view. Helen, very briefly, because you got more of a chance to answer the previous question. So actually, if you could address Ivo's question alone, and yeah.
No?
Yeah, I will let Sharon too, but
okay,
if you,
okay, perfect,
yeah.
perfect.
Or if you want to address a different question, I'll let you go on at the end. So I'll let you, but quickly.
Well,
quickly.
it's linked. It's linked. I was going to address the carbon price question because I do think carbon prices right now are very low. Not everywhere. In Sweden, the carbon tax is over $160 per ton of carbon, but in most places they are low. But I think linked to Ivo's question, what we're seeing is that businesses globally are starting to call for carbon pricing. We're getting businesses coming forward with this. We're hearing from Sharon that more and more people are asking for this. So is the momentum building enough that governments will actually take action? And on carbon pricing, the interesting part is that there's more and more spreading. As there's more spreading, there should be less concerns about competitiveness impacts. If your colleagues, if your other countries are actually doing the same thing, it's not going to disadvantage your industries.
Lovely, thank you very much. Ellen, I'll give you your final chance. Would you like to address carbon prices too, actually? Because would you welcome a carbon price that was suggested $70 a ton? Would you welcome that?
I will first answer the first question of before. How do we create political will to address climate and then carbon price? Very rapidly. The political will, I think, will be created by showing that a low-carbon economy is also an economy that can develop and create jobs and richness and everything. And we have several proofs of that, and I'm sure it's a matter of demonstration and not being also too dramatical regarding climate, but to demonstrate what can be created. Regarding carbon price, of course, carbon price that help technologies to move towards low carbon technologies should be high, and for sure higher than the levels that are already today in Europe. Whether it's 30, 40 or 70, I'm not an expert of the models, but I know that there are a lot of economists that foresee at least 30 or 40, and our CEO is also talking about that levels, at least to have technologies move from high carbon or to low carbon ones.
Thank you very much. Sharon, I'll give you a chance to have your final words.
Well, on the political will question, Ivo, that would be fantastic. Referendum right around the world. I know where the people will stand because they are seeing the future. They're seeing if I just look at that poll very quickly, two countries, Philippines and Indonesia, 88% in Philippines and 90% of people in Indonesia said act quickly, act within 12 months. They know the realities. So we know that we can get people to demand it. What we can't do is actually yet use that people power against the drag on political will, which is their self-interested short-term profits of the dominant corporations who aren't acting in the interest of planning for our jobs for the future because they're still focused on short-term profits. We want them and we want our pension money in those companies who are serious about diversification. So a referendum, let's go after the polluters and say, change your act or you're not going to be part of the future as the corporations you are today, and then we might see the political will emerge. But it has to emerge. It just has to emerge. And a carbon price, let's not argue about a carbon tax or a carbon trading system. The market will decide that. Let's have a carbon price. I mean, if we're seriously got to transition away from it, let's make it pay. Let's actually make it pay for the transition. People want to use carbon, pay the price, and let governments actually invest in the communities that are willing to make the transition, and then you'll put them out of business over time. My understanding is that, I'm not sure about Viola, but that companies already are factoring. Big companies have a shadow carbon price factored into their business plans. 40, 50, 70 I've heard, 100 I've heard. So, you know, whatever it is, they know they've got to face it. What's the problem with our governments who are too frightened to sit down collectively? And can I just go back to the Poland situation? I'm sorry, but I haven't seen from Poland and many other countries a plan for the transition of our coal miners. You know, coal is dead within 15 to 20 years maximum. But new coal is dead now. So what is the plan for our members so that their jobs and their communities are there? And frankly, Poland met its Kyoto targets because the lower manufacturing base meant that they could actually trade off carbon credits. I know these are painful discussions, but we've got to get down to the detail. I want Poland to be a lead transition country. I want all the countries in Europe to be a lead transition country. And the EU's ambitions are one thing, but every country has to have a plan, or otherwise our workers, their communities, they're going to face the most disruptive future that you can imagine. And it won't be pretty. It just won't be pretty. We'll see community versus community, worker versus worker. We'll see economies really at risk because if the divestment movement gets ahead of the engagement and diversification movement, then frankly we're going to see economies at real risk. So everybody, I'm not just picking on Poland, everybody has to act with a view to the future.
I have to answer that question. I don't know what is the prospect of Australia. And did you reduce 30% last 25 years? No. So I don't point Poland,
no, but I would be
because
just as
it is not the purpose. The purpose is transition and not to pointing out. Because if you will point out in Paris, you will not have an agreement. Not because of Poland. Poland is a part of EU, so we have our ENDC decided. So, but the climate policy is not the shaming and naming, and it is about common effort towards a common goal. Thank you.
I agree with that, but can I say Australia's a climate vandal right now too, and I'd love the referenda to start right there. It wasted 5 to 6 years of our lives getting a carbon trading system, bringing people on board, getting the communities to understand the higher the action of on climate, the better the prospects for jobs were, and we're back to zero from again, and I'm not afraid to say it, the influence of a few self-interested corporations and not a vision for the future. We do have to all act in cooperation, no question, but we can't act behind the excuses about why we can't get to beyond the commitments because they're not going to make that 2-degree world. And the precious barrier reef in Australia that we all love and care about so much is gone. It's gone today. So let's not go make any more damage because we refuse to act.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. Our time is up. Sigurd, I will give you 30 seconds for your very last thought. One thought to sum up.
Right. Let me answer just one question. How do we create the necessary political will? A problem with the climate change crisis is that it's like the crisis, and this is a well-known story to all of you, like the crisis of a frog, which is enjoying the gradually warming up water. And that frog doesn't know that he is going to face the ultimate crisis of extinction. Now, I'm talking about a gradually building up crisis. This is part of one thought. And but the good news is that we are wiser and cleverer than frogs. And the point is that, but we do not know how serious, how existentialist a crisis that climate change presents us. We do need education of the voters at all levels, from primary school to all the way up to the adult level. Talk about the crisis of the threats from the climate crisis, not just rising seawater and a bear on a polar piece of ice, but talk about what is happening to the planetary boundaries. The ecosystem is dying, and so on. Okay, I'm not going into there. So we do need education.
That's a brilliant, thought to end on.
Education of the crisis, as well as education of the benefits from exploiting the opportunities and benefits, as was mentioned by Helen.
As Tony Blair said, education, 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 and I think that's a fantastic final thought.
For the short term, the coalition of the like-minded political leaders at G20 and so on. That would do the work. And without this, we cannot win the referendum that you favor.
That's brilliant. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much to our panelists who have been fantastic. Thank you very much to everyone who joined in through the internet. Thank you very much for the questions from the hall. We had 2 polls there. We found some very interesting results. And I think we're all agreed on the urgency of now when it comes to Paris. Thank you all for coming. Thanks.